Good morning, everyone, and welcome. I call this meeting of the NCUA Board to order. In addition to those joining us in the boardroom today, I want to note for the record that today's meeting is open to the public through a live webcast. For anyone watching us online, if you would like to view the closed captioning, please click on the CC icon located in the lower left corner of the WebEx window. You may also change the layout to one of your choosing by clicking the layout option on the top right side of your screen. Before we proceed with today's agenda, I have several announcements. First, since we last met as a board, the NCUA has issued 2 notable letters to credit unions. One of those letters provides guidance to credit unions about working with CUSOs and addresses some of the primary related risks. Depending on the activity, those risks may include credit, strategic, compliance, and reputation risk. Credit unions should also consider the risks related to fair lending and unfair, deceptive, or abusive acts and practices. The other letter announces a change in the Home Mortgage Disclosure Act's reporting requirements for closed-end mortgages. The threshold for reporting data on closed-end mortgage loans is now 25 loans in each of the last 2 preceding calendar years. Both letters to credit unions are available online at ncua.gov. Second, the NCUA has made 3 senior hires since our last meeting. The first is Corey Ferris as the new president of NCUA's Asset Management and Assistance Center. Corey has more than 2 decades of experience at the NCUA and has previously played a significant role in several large, complex credit union resolutions. In his new role, Corey will serve as the key advisor to the NCUA board on matters like implementing liquidation payouts, managing assets acquired from liquidations, and supervising recoveries for the National Credit Union Share Insurance Fund. The second hiring announcement is Jamie Underwood's promotion to Deputy Director in the Office of National Examinations and Supervision. Jamie also has more than 20 years of experience at NCUA, and she is very well suited to take on this important role in assisting in the examination and supervision activities for corporate credit unions and our nation's largest consumer credit unions. Jamie will start her new job at the end of the month. Lastly, after a lengthy search, we are very pleased to welcome aboard Ji Kwan as the NCUA's Deputy Board Secretary. Ji joins us from the Marine Corps, where he was retired after 20 years of active duty service. Ji served in the rank of Lieutenant Colonel and last served in the Marine Corps as legal counsel to the Deputy Commandant for Manpower Reserve Affairs. Manpower Reserve Affairs. Welcome to all of you. We are looking forward to seeing what good things Corey, Jamie, and G accomplish in their new positions. That concludes our opening announcements, but I'll pause here for anything that the Vice Chairman might want to add.
Sure. I concur with Chairman Harper. We are excited to have these folks. 2 of the 3 are internal promotions. Now, you want to have the best people no matter what, but I think it's good that when you can promote the best person, and it is internal, that means we're hiring the right people at all different levels. Gee, welcome to your first board meeting. Happy to have you here. And this is weird to say to someone who was a Marine for 20 years, but that might be your toughest boss you ever had. It's your first meeting, boot camp. To Corey, that's a super important job running our what we call AMAC. By the way, already impressed with the communication to us about the communication out to the credit unions that may be getting some money back this year. And to Jamie, Deputy Director, Office of National Examination and Supervision, fun time to join. We may, I mean, it's anybody's guess, but we may be going into some kind of economic downturn or a softening, and that is when insurance is needed. So fun times to be around at NCUA. That concludes my remarks.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Board Member Hood.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I, too, want to applaud our new promotions. And Corey Ferris, where do I begin other than just thanking him for the wonderful work he did in advising me when we were handling the taxi medallion crisis, and how he really provided wonderful expertise. His core competencies, you all, are just beyond compare, and I'm sure he will continue to exceed all of our expectations in his newly announced role there at AMAC. Jamie also provided a lot of great deal of attention and service when I returned to the agency in April of 2019. So Jamie is going to do yeoman's work there in ones. And to the vice chairman's comment, yes, this is going to be an interesting time to really have all of her business acumen serve her and the agency quite well. And Ji-Kwan, we certainly do want to welcome you. I enjoyed meeting you earlier this week, and I can already tell you're hitting the ground running. I so look forward to continued engagement. I know we're going to be hoping to automate some of our board activities, and you'll be able to help with that process, I'm sure. So to all of you, Corey, Jamie, and G, we on the board look forward to your continued success here at NCUA.
Thank you both. Now turning to our agenda, the first item of business is the Share Insurance Fund Quarterly Report Board Briefing. Chief Financial Officer Eugene Sheed will present, and Office of Examination and Insurance Director Kelly Lay will be available for questions. You may start whenever you are ready.
Good morning, Chairman Harper,
Good morning.
Vice Chairman Hopman, and Board Member Hood. I am here to present the 2022 fourth quarter financial statistics for the Share Insurance Fund. Slide 2. To begin my quarterly update, I will note that our external auditor, KPMG, through contract with the Office of the Inspector General, has completed the financial statement audit of the Share Insurance Fund for the year ended December 31st, 2022. The fund received an unmodified or clean opinion on the presentation of the financial statements with no reportable conditions. This is also true of the audits of the operating fund, the Community Development Revolving Loan Fund, and the Central Liquidity Facility. In its audit, KPMG found that the financial statements were fairly presented in accordance with U.S. generally accepted accounting principles. There were no material weaknesses or significant deficiencies in internal controls that would cause the financial statements to be materially misstated, and there were no instances of non-compliance with other matters that are required to be reported under the government auditing standards and Office of Management and Budget guidance. The year-end audited statements can be found on NCUA's website. In addition to my team, staff throughout the agency worked on the year-end financial reporting and audit process, and I want to sincerely thank them for their hard work and contributions. Slide 3. This table shows the Share Insurance Fund's revenues and expenses for the fourth quarter of 2022 and for fiscal year 2022. The quarter that ended December 31st, 2022, the fund recorded net income of $18.9 million. For 2022, the total net income was $118.9 million. For the quarter, total income of $83.1 million primarily consists of investment income from Treasury securities of $82.9 million. The operating expenses were $53.6 million for the quarter. The provision for insurance loss reserve expense increased by $10.1 million during the quarter, and I'll discuss that in more detail on slide 5. The asset management estate loss reduction for natural person credit unions was $3.4 million due to favorable changes in the estimated future cash flows of certain assets held by the asset management estates. And the corporate asset management estate loss expense increased by $3.9 million due to changes in legacy asset valuations held by those estates. Slide 4. This table shows the Share Insurance Fund's balance sheet as of December 31st, 2022, compared to the previous year. As of December 31st, total assets are valued at $20.4 billion, of which 99% are funds held with U.S. Treasury in cash, overnight investments, and long-term Treasury notes. Total assets decreased by $371.7 million, primarily due to an unrealized loss on Treasury investments, offset by capital deposit adjustments for credit unions that occurred during the year. The net receivable from the asset management estates is $76.5 million. The receivable from the natural person credit union asset management estates increased by $3.3 million due to changes in expected cash collections, offset by AME receipts and recoveries and a decrease in claim payments. The receivable from the corporate credit union asset management estates decreased by $149.8 million, primarily due to cash collections and recoveries from legacy asset sales and the U.S. Central Capital Distribution, offset by claims payments and changes in expected cash collections. Accrued interest and other assets are $122.7 million, which increased by 10% from last year end, mainly due to an increase in Treasury interest receivable and prepayments to the operating fund. Total liabilities are $188.2 million, or 1% of total assets. Accounts payable and other liabilities of $3 million primarily consists of payments due to credit unions of $2.2 million. The fund's net position is comprised of cumulative results of operations and capital deposits. The capitalization deposits consist of 1% of each federally insured credit union's total insured shares. Net capitalization deposit activity increased by $1.1 billion during the year. The cumulative results of operations decreased by $1.5 billion during the year due to an unrealized loss on investments of $1.6 billion, offset by the $118.7 million in net income for the year. Slide 5. The SIF records an insurance program liability comprised of general reserve and specific reserves to cover losses resulting from insured credit union failures. Each quarter, we assess the reserve needs of the credit union's failures to make a reasonable estimate of losses. During the fourth quarter, the reserve expense increased by $10.1 million, primarily due to an increase in the general reserves. At the year end, reserves totaled $185.2 million, and that was broken out $7.7 million for specific reserves and $177.5 million for the general reserve. Slide 6. Through the fourth quarter of 2022, 6 credit union failures incurred a loss to the fund. There were 2 involuntary liquidations with a purchase and assumption agreement, 2 involuntary liquidations without a purchase and assumption agreement, and 2 assisted mergers. The cost of the failures in 2022 was $9.8 million. Fraud was a contributing factor in 5 of the 6 failures. Slide 7. As of December 31st, 2022, the Share Insurance Fund had $21.3 billion at par value invested in Treasury securities with maturities out to February 2030. The weighted average life of securities held by the fund is 3.3 years. The weighted average yield of securities held by the fund increased 17 basis points from the last quarter to 1.59%. The lower bar chart shows the cumulative picture of how much of the portfolio will mature over time. About 73% of the portfolio will mature within the next 5 years. During the fourth quarter of 2022, 7 Treasury notes matured for $700 million. These securities had yields ranging between 0.12% to 2.11%. These maturities were placed into overnights. Overnights increased to $1.67 billion during the quarter, which I will discuss more on the next slide. Slide 8. This presents additional information about the NCUA's current investment strategy. As I noted, the NCUA has increased the portion of the fund's investment portfolio held in overnights. As of December 31st, $1.67 billion of the portfolio was in overnights. As I discussed with the board at the November board meeting, the investment committee was reevaluating the position in the portion of the portfolio to be held in overnights and has since set $4 billion as our current overnight liquidity target. The investment committee made this change considering the goal included in the board-approved annual performance plan to be able to meet cost and liquidity needs without having to sell investments at a loss, considering that the portfolio is generally carrying an unrealized loss of $1.67 billion as of the end of the year. The target of $4 billion in overnights was benchmarked for the single largest short-term liquidity assistance need that the fund has realized. The increase in overnights is consistent with the NCUA's overall investment strategy and our 10-year ladder approach. The investment committee meets at least quarterly to assess, among other issues, the fund's possible liquidity needs. The 10-year ladder provides for a quarterly steady stream of maturities and liquidity needs, and historically has resulted in a higher expected return than just investing in the shorter end of the Treasury ladder. For those interested, Appendix 1, which is on slide 16, compares the fund's 10-year performance, or the fund's performance to the 10-year Treasury bond and the 90-day T-bill. Slide 9. Turning to the equity ratio chart, the current equity ratio was calculated as of December 31st, 2022. Per policy, the equity ratio is updated on a semi-annual basis. The current equity ratio is 1.30% and was calculated using an insured share base of nearly $1.7 trillion. The blue line running across the chart represents the normal operating level, which was set at 1.33% in December 2021 and has remained the same in December 2022. Slide 10. This slide shows the fourth quarter share insurance fund equity ratio calculation based on the December 2022 audited financial statements and the December call report data as of February 10th, 2023. From June 2022 to December 2022, the equity ratio increased 4 basis points from 1.26% to 1.30%. The primary driver of the growth of the equity ratio is attributable to a decrease in insured shares from June 2022 to December 2022 at a non-annualized rate of minus 0.3%. Other contributing factors to the increase in the equity ratio are an improvement in the portfolio, the investment portfolio's yield, and a low loss rate from failed credit unions. The ratio is calculated using an insured share base of $1.7 trillion at December 2022. Insured shares is the denominator in the ratio. The sum of contributed capital and retained earnings is the numerator in the ratio, and increased from June 2022 to December. As noted on the bottom of the chart, unrealized gains and losses in the portfolio are excluded from the equity ratio calculation. Slide 11. The fourth quarter CAMELS data is presented on the following 3 slides and is current as of December 31st, 2022. This slide shows the distribution of insured shares by CAMEL codes from 2017 through the fourth quarter of 2022. In the area graph at the upper portion of the slide, the light blue portion represents, in the graph represents the percentage of total credit union insured shares that are at credit unions with CAMEL codes 1 or 2. The gray represents the percentage at CAMEL's coded 3 credit unions, and the dark blue represents CAMEL's code 4 and 5. The table underneath the area graph displays the total number of credit unions by their respective CAMEL codes. During the quarter, the percentage of insured shares at credit unions with CAMEL's codes 1 or 2 decreased. The percentage of insured shares at CAMEL's code 3 and 4 and 5 credit unions increased during the quarter. As depicted on the bottom of the table, the number of credit unions as of December 31st, 2022 was 4,780, which is a decrease of 47 credit unions from the prior quarter. Slide 12. This slide shows the distribution of assets by CAMEL code from December 2007 through December 2022. As in the previous slide, the light blue portion represents the CAMEL codes 1 and 2, the gray represents CAMEL code 3, and the dark blue represents the percentage of assets at credit unions that are CAMEL code 4 or 5. The distribution of assets at credit unions CAMEL's code 1 or 2 decreased during the quarter to 96.4%. The distribution of assets for at credit unions CAMEL code 3 and those at CAMEL code 4 and 5 both increased during the quarter. CAMEL code 3 increased to 3.3%, whereas CAMEL's code 4 and 5 credit union assets increased to 0.3%. Slide 13. This slide compares the credit union's camel codes by asset size. Camel Code 4 and 5 credit unions are shown on the left-hand side, whereas the Camel Code 3 credit unions are displayed on the right-hand side of the graph. Looking at the 122 total credit unions that are Camel Code 4 or 5 by asset size, most of these credit unions continue to have assets of $100 million or less. For those with assets greater than $100 million, there was a decrease in the number of 4 and 5 credit union. Camel Code 4 and 5 credit unions with assets from $100 million to $500 million. Credit unions Camel Code 4 and 5 with assets greater than $500 million increased during the quarter. During the quarter, both assets and insured shares at credit unions Camel Code 4 and 5 increased. Assets increased from $3.8 billion to $5.6 billion, and insured shares increased from $3.6 billion to $4.9 billion. Turning to the 769 credit unions Camel Code 3, most of these credit unions continue to have assets that are less than $500 million. During this quarter, there was an increase in the number of Camel Code 3 credit unions with assets that range between $500 million and $1 billion, and additionally, there was also an increase in the number of credit union Camel Code 3 with assets greater than $1 billion. For credit unions that are Camel Code 3, insured shares increased from $42.3 billion to $61.5 billion, and assets increased from $47.9 billion to $71.4 billion. Slide 14. This concludes the presentation, and Kelly and I would be happy to answer your questions.
Thank you, Eugene, to you and your team for your thorough presentation on the National Credit Union Share Insurance Fund's performance in 2022. And Kelly, thank you for being available to answer questions today. Additionally, Eugene, a special thanks to you and everyone in the Office of the Chief Financial Officer for ensuring that the NCUA's 4 funds each earned a clean audit opinion in 2022. I also want to thank the Office of the Inspector General and our independent auditor, KPMG, for their good work throughout the process. Just as we expect the credit unions that we regulate and insure to balance their books and ledgers, the NCUA as a regulator must also commit to the same level of transparency and accountability for our financial operations. For Eugene and his team, the annual audit of the NCUA's funds is their Super Bowl. After all, just like there are 4 quarters in a football game, they've got 4 funds to manage. And while there are no halftime shows, fireworks, trophies, or giant rings at the end of the audit process, the work and perseverance shown by everyone on your team, Eugene, during the last few months is worthy of the same level of recognition. So thank you again to everyone on your team for a job very well done.
Thank you.
It's also worth acknowledging that the NCUA's sustained achievement of unmodified audit opinions now has grown to more than 40 years. This record underscores the NCUA's commitment to sound financial management and the careful stewardship of the resources entrusted to the agency. Additional information on the agency's financial management and performance in 2022 will be available in the 2022 annual report, which we will release in the middle of March. Last year, we experienced high levels of economic uncertainty and a rising interest rate environment. Yet, overall, the credit union system and the Share Insurance Fund performed well during the year. As noted earlier, the rise in interest rates increased the Share Insurance Fund's income, a welcome departure from the low earnings environment that we have seen for the last decade. Also, insured share growth moderated during the second half of the year as members drew down some of the savings they had built up during the pandemic. These factors all contributed to an increase in the Share Insurance Fund's equity ratio, which ended the year at 1.3%, up from 1.26% at the end of 2021. That's the positive news. Now, for the less positive news. The Share Insurance Fund's assets declined due to unrealized losses of approximately $1.5 billion during the year. We did expect that. That's because as interest rates go up, the value of the bonds that are held in the Share Insurance Fund's portfolio go down. This brings me to my first question, if we could pull up slide 4. Eugene, while the NCUA's policy is to hold these investments to maturity, what are we doing to account for and compensate for the unrealized losses that you just reported? Said another way, how are we acting to prevent unrealized losses from becoming realized losses?
Thank you for the question, Chairman. So we are actively managing the investment portfolio to reduce that risk that we would ever have to realize any of those losses. The overnight investment portion of the portfolio, which by their nature don't carry an unrealized gain or loss, has increased from $362 million, that was the end of third quarter, to $1.67 billion at the end of the year. Our current plan is to increase the overnight holdings to up to $4 billion. We believe that this would well position the fund to meet any liquidity needs without having to sell any of the current investment portfolio at a loss. That concludes my answer.
Thank you, Eugene. As a follow-up, I see also on this slide that the net position of capitalization deposits is $16.9 billion. I understand that that number is likely to shrink here in the near future. Why is that, and what effect will that have overall on the equity ratio?
So yes, the net position of capital deposits I expect will decline during the second quarter of 2023 by an estimated $63 million. That's because the total insured shares fell between June 30th and December 31st. As a result, when we run the cycle 1 deposit adjustments, we'll actually be sending more money out to credit unions as a refund because their insured shares went down. And that'll be larger than the amount that we would collect from credit unions whose share balances had gone up during the second half of the year, which is a pretty unusual situation. Per policy, we only actually report the equity ratio as of semi-annually, June 30th, December 31st. But to get at your question as to the effect of the equity ratio, its practical effect is that the refund, when that happens, would have the impact of slightly lowering the equity ratio to 1.29%. Okay. And that concludes my response.
Thanks, Eugene. Now, if we could pull up slide 7. Eugene, you noted that we've begun increasing the dollar amount of overnight notes that we are holding in portfolio, and the goal is eventually to reach $4 billion in such investments. That's a prudent decision, given the current rise in credit unions with a composite Camel's Code 3, 4, or 5 rating. How will the movement to overnight investments ensure that the Share Insurance Fund has the liquidity needed to get through any future downturn?
Sure. The $4 billion overnight target, again, was benchmarked to the largest emergency liquidity event that the funds had, where we needed to extend funding on extremely short notice. That movement to the overnights is continuing actually to help the fund's yield, as overnights have been earning between about 450 and 460 basis points. The investment ladder also helps with our liquidity position, in that it provides a continuous flow of maturities each quarter, averaging about $700 million per quarter. That helps the agency to adjust the overnight target either up or down as we see changes in conditions and the need to do so.
You said that the $4 billion was set based on the previous largest liquidity. Was that the corporate credit union crisis, or was that the taxi medallion crisis, or was it a different crisis? Because I know at a certain point in time, we all as an agency had to come to Congress and ask for $6 billion to the Share Insurance Fund in order to support the system.
You want to answer that one?
Yeah, I can answer that question.
Thanks,
So
Kelly.
yes, the $4 billion liquidity target was set due to the U.S. Central emergency liquidity loan that we needed to provide on very short notice.
Great. We talk about black swans. We need to recognize black swans like that and build our programs around them. So thank you. During the last few quarters, we've also seen growing stress within the system because of interest rate and liquidity risk. Additionally, we have begun to identify more instances of internal control problems at credit unions, which can lead to uncovering of fraud, credit union liquidations, as you noted earlier, and losses to the Share Insurance Fund. That is why some element of on-site examinations remains so critical to identifying safety and soundness issues and risks to the Share Insurance Fund. On-site exams facilitate discussions about how best to address liquidity and interest risk. On-site exams also allow for better testing of internal controls and a closer review of loan documents. As NCUA examiners continue to return on-site while continuing to conduct some portion of the exam process virtually, And as interest rates continue to rise, we will likely see more composite CAMELS codes 3, 4, and 5 to rise. That is, that they will get worse in the coming quarters. So we should expect the metrics found on slide 12 of the slide deck to get worse in the coming quarters. And it was a bit breathtaking to see just how large that growth was in our largest of credit unions. Actually, I think one or two back. No, go the other direct, go to maybe 13 or 14.
Slide 13.
But it was just a dramatic rise there, from 6 to 12 credit unions. We doubled the number of credit unions and we tripled the number of assets in CAMELS Code 3 credit unions. It's something that we're going to have to watch out for as a board and as an agency, and take all necessary actions to maintain the stability and ensure the strength of the Share Insurance Fund. The NCUA, however, could also benefit from more tools in its toolbox before things get worse, such as the regulatory flexibility when it comes to administering the Central Liquidity Facility, that's CLF for short. Despite the best efforts of my fellow board members, the NCUA staff, and me, Congress decided not to make permanent the enhanced authority the CARES Act temporarily provided for the CLF. As a result, 3,322 credit unions, all with less than $250 million in assets, lost access to the CLF when the agent member provision expired on December 31st. In addition, the expiration of the CARES Act provisions reduced the CLF's borrowing capacity by $10 billion. Now is not the time to cut a liquidity lifeline. I can't say that enough. It's important that the CLF remains strong and able to meet the liquidity needs of the credit union system, especially as we see risks rising on the horizon. Under the leadership of the CLF president, Anthony Capetta, we have bolstered and improved the facility's processes, operations, and structures, and we will continue that work. We will also work to educate credit unions about the need and benefits of joining the CLF. Yet the NCUA's ability to respond to a liquidity event would be greatly enhanced by restoring the CLF's expanded authority. That's why we as an entire board sent a letter just yesterday to congressional leaders requesting the restoration of the CARES Act provisions for the CLF. I want to thank the Vice Chairman. I want to thank Board Member Hood for their steadfast support of this NCUA legislative priority. That concludes my remarks, and you're now recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Eugene and Kelly. I want to reiterate what the chairman just said about the CLF. Listen, the situation is what it is. To any small credit union out there, since you can't use the agent membership that we had before, you want to do the work today to sign up for the liquidity facility. By definition, when you need emergency liquidity is not when you plan for it. To the trade groups and the leagues out there, this is something you can do to earn your dues that they pay you. Get the word out, make it easy, send the links. We can make life a lot easier on a lot of people with a little bit of work up front, given that many of the smaller credit unions, as we sit here today, do not have direct access to our central liquidity facility. So back to the SIF. The credit union movement and the Share Insurance Fund continued showing positive results last quarter despite persistent economic uncertainty. Credit unions obviously have a vested interest in the maintenance of our Share Insurance Fund. The fund's money belongs to credit unions and their member owners. Although the Share Insurance Fund is managed by NCUA, it is cooperative in nature, much like the credit union movement itself. So improved investment income, no significant credit union failures, and a decline in the insured shares are factors that cause our equity ratio to reach 1.3%. That's the highest it's been since before the pandemic, although that is still a touch below our normal operating level of 1.33. I appreciate the work that my fellow board members and the Office of the CFO did after last year's Q2 report to update the Share Insurance Fund investment portfolio, which meant increasing the percentage of investment in overnight funds. Just like a credit union board, the NCUA board has the responsibility to regularly review its investment strategy. And I'm glad the money parked in overnight funds means we're less likely to sell other investments at a loss. Shout out to Rodney Hood for talking about our investment strategy often. But regardless of the fund's performance or what happens with interest rates, it's interesting to note that last year, of the 6 times a credit union failed, 5 of those involved fraud. Thus, protecting the Share Insurance Fund also means watching for fraud. we have enough problems with economic conditions and loans gone bad. So it's a shame when an economically viable credit union fails due to human failing, fraud. Another item in today's update is the continued distributions from the corporate credit crisis that occurred a few years back. Next month will be a distribution of various credit unions of about $218 million. That's good news. Also good news, from a communications perspective, we are now informing those credit unions about the distributions before they get them. I made a priority of this 2 years ago, that we give a heads up on these. On Monday, this past Monday, credit unions got an email saying the approximate amount and date of the distribution. I'm proud to take some credit for a small operational improvement that can make a big difference to credit unions. So in conclusion, despite persistent economic uncertainty, inflation, rising interest rates, it's the NCUA's job to ensure the fund remains well capitalized with enough liquidity to address issues as they arise. Credit union member owners should have 100% faith in NCUA's insurance, regardless of extenuating circumstances. The whole point of insurance is the unexpected and the unforeseen. I now have a few questions. Can we review what portion of the funds are currently parked in overnight investments?
Sure. At present, 7.82% of the portfolio is in the overnight investments, or $1.67 billion.
1.67 billion. And so in overnights now, thanks to the Fed, what do we earn on those? 4 and change?
458 last night, I believe was the
Gotcha.
amount.
It's not bad, 4.58 for almost no risk. That's what the Fed is intending, shift money from riskier investments into safer ones. And when do you think we'll hit our target of $4 billion in overnights?
The current rate of roughly $700 million in maturities per quarter, I think we'll be really close to the target in August. And then in the certainly by the fourth quarter, we would be at or above $4 billion.
Understood. Okay. And last year, we said 5 out of 6 credit union failures involved that had a loss to this fund had fraud as a factor. How does this compare to the year before?
5 out of 6 were for 2022, and for 2021, there were 7 failures that incurred a loss. 4 of those had fraud as a contributing factor. On average, over the past several years, I generally estimate that there's about 75% of the failures cite fraud as a contributing factor.
And how much of that is because the economy's been flush with money, the denominator, total failures, is lower?
So that
like if we had the same amount of fraud, like 5 out of 6 last year, but the economy went south and we had 20 failures that had a loss, then in theory that would be 5 out of 20. So the human failing is a constant. Human greed is a constant.
Yes.
Right. So is the percentage high because there's a lot of fraud, or is the percentage high because there's some fraud and we don't have that many other failures?
So I think it's more the latter.
Right.
There aren't that many other failures.
Either way, remarkable. 9 out of 13 failures that we had to write a check as a fund involve fraud. And, NCUA does a good job at regulation and insurance, but a credit union CEO, they and they alone are responsible for what happens to that credit union. And so all the credit union board members out there, your responsibility is hiring and firing the CEO. So I always say, we're not the parents of credit unions. They know what's best for their members, but it's incumbent upon the board to be very careful who they pick as CEO. And it's incumbent upon the CEO to be responsible for everything that happens in that credit union and everybody they hire. So just to recap, again, I'm patting myself on the back here, but we've been sending money for the corporates, returning it to people. I think it was my very first board meeting. People all of a sudden got money, and nobody told them it was coming. Now, there was some public information on our site, but I hate to break it to you, NCUA.gov is not a heavily trafficked website. And I got pushback. We don't know exactly how much it is. Well, sure. But it's like, people who count on tax refunds. You have a ballpark amount of money. When did we start actually telling credit unions, hey, heads up, there's some money coming your way in the coming months, and your share of it, which they can calculate, should be ballpark? When did that start?
So I believe that practice started last year. So when we did the distribution last March, there was an advance notice, I believe, in January or February. that had started, again, at your suggestion.
I was going to ask, was there a particularly charismatic board member that asked? Yes. But my favorite email I got this week was on Monday from our newly promoted Corey Ferris, who informed us that this email is going out. And you don't even have to have the right dollar amount. I mean, nobody is more creative and puts the work in quicker than someone who knows they has cash coming to them. They will figure it out. But we had before, people do their budgets, maybe even had to lay somebody off, and then found out some money arrived. Again, it's a good problem to have money show up, but they would have preferred to know that beforehand. And we can ballpark. We know we don't know to the dollar, to the cent how much it is because you have to sell all the assets and you don't know what the market's going to do. But just the notion, you've got some money coming your way. Here's the total bucket right now. I think that's one of those small organizational managerial improvements that we can be proud of. Back to you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you so much. I certainly, in the Kyle Hoffman fan club, in terms of, you bring a fresh set of eyes to our issues. And just because we have done something that way for a very long time doesn't mean we can't improve the process and transparency. And
I think that was Congress's intent, having revolving, and it's funny because all three of us here, we all have pretty bad eyes. All three of us, yeah.
All righty. Board Member Hood, please proceed.
Great, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Eugene and Kelly, good morning, and thank you for your steadfast oversight of the Share Insurance Fund. Eugene, I want to certainly applaud you for, again, another successful year of 4 clean audits. So hats off to you and ACFO for the great work you do each and every day. I want to begin by just asking this question. What is the equity ratio of the Share Insurance Fund once the true-up issue is accounted for?
Okay, thank you for that question. So factoring in the effects of the Cycle 1 capitalization deposit adjustment, or the true-up as we often do call it, that we'll do in April, that would have the impact of slightly lowering the equity ratio to about 1.29%. Unlike most cycles, we're projecting again that the net capitalization deposit will result in a refund of about $63 million rather than a net collection in. Which has that impact of lowering that calculation. The refund is the result of, again, the decline in insured shares that occurred between June and December.
So should we take this then now for the public's concern that $63 million will be coming to them?
Yes.
Okay, good. Just with the Vice Chairman, wanting to announce when funds are going to be made readily available. Why the shares fell in the last quarter of 2022, something I quite think we've not seen in quite some time. This is causing the equity ratio to be higher by about, 0.3 of a basis point than it would be if we factored in the true-up adjustment. In other years, the true-up adjustment I think it's had a much more material impact. And I think it really gets to the timeliness of the data at hand. At a previous board meeting on the status of the Share Insurance Fund, we discussed the outside accounting firm we hired to look at the true-up issue and how this actually impacts the timeliness and accuracy of reporting the equity ratio. In fact, Eugene, I recall you're telling me that staff was on track to do the assessment of this matter by the fourth quarter of last year and bring it to the board. So has the assessment yet been completed, and when will the board be updated?
Thank you. And yes, I think as you noted in previous years, the true-up has had a bigger impact in terms of what it hypothetically would have done to the equity ratio calculation. And this year we see it actually going the reverse, which is, in some ways, it'll have a declining effect to the equity ratio. So I do think it's important to figure out where are some ways to sort of improve that process so that the true-up doesn't, cause this sort of distorting effect on a timing basis. So the team that worked on that assessment has in fact completed their draft. That's an inter-office review right now. And I anticipate being able to brief the board offices in the next month.
Oh, that's great. Thank you. And I look forward to that session. I know the chairman talked a bit about the $4 billion in overnights, and I was going to ask some of those same questions, and especially regarding the triggering events that would really stipulate that we do that. But you mentioned the last time we set that as a policy was because of U.S. Central.
Yes,
What
I'll
was
take
the-
that question.
Okay.
It was the high water mark was that we're setting at the $4 billion liquidity target for is based off of that U.S. Central Emergency Liquidity Loan that we provided, I believe, in 2008 was the time frame.
Very well, and that's the $4 billion. Got it. But then A question I would have then is, I understand that we don't want to recognize investment losses by selling treasuries if liquidity is needed, but then why wouldn't we just borrow it if we lack liquidity at NCUA?
So I'll take that question. The board has expressed concern about borrowing, as noted in our annual performance plan goal, to maintain an investment strategy that would provide for sufficient funds to cover operating expenses and those liquidity needs, and do so without selling investments at a loss and without having to borrow. And there's a few reasons for that. So timing is one of those reasons. Borrowings wouldn't be immediate, and so that process may take a few days. And having a higher liquidity target gives us more control over that. So timing is one issue. Another is just the optics, right? Our optics of borrowing may not be so good to the credit union industry, especially given what's going on in our concern of liquidity in the credit union system. And then finally, there's a cost to borrowing. And right now, the cost is a little bit higher than it has been in the past because those term investment rates are lower than what the current cost would be.
Great,
That
thank you.
concludes my response.
Thank you, Kelly, for a very detailed response. Shifting gears once again, what's the weighted average maturity of the National Credit Union Share Insurance Fund, and how are we managing it for liquidity needs and operating costs?
So the weighted average maturity for the SIF is 3.25 years at year end. And so in managing the weighted average maturity for our liquidity needs, maturities in the short term will be invested in those overnight options. And then the weighted average maturity will decline as we continue to put funds into those shorter term borrowings. In the short term, the share insurance fund portfolio is expected to yield more than investing in the 10-year ladder at this point, since the yield curve is inverted right now. And that would help us or be a positive when paying for our operating costs, at least in the short term. That concludes my response.
Great, thank you, Kelly. Again, very detailed response. One of the big issues when I'm out visiting with credit unions is how are they going to mitigate interest rate risk in today's environment? And I'd like to let the industry know that we also look at interest rate risk and mitigation techniques here at NCUA. So regarding the investment strategy overall, can someone please address our interest rate risk and how we're managing it head on?
Yeah, I'll take that question as well. So as a reminder, interest rate risk for the share insurance fund is really the current and prospective risk to the share insurance fund's capital and earnings. And so our investment strategy really takes that balanced approach when dealing with those risks to capital and earnings. Our ladder strategy creates earning stability in the fund and helps protect and limit the effects of lower rates on earnings. The strategy also ensures that there's those quarterly buckets, those quarterly maturities to provide available funds if the portfolio is in a loss position as it is now, and there are outflows that are needed for the share insurance fund. That concludes my response.
Great, thank you. And I just have a few more questions. If we could please turn to slide 20. Perfect, thank you. I don't need to tell the crowd that we certainly do see some adverse trends regarding CAMEL's data. And I think it would not be wise at this time to try to interpret the numbers or the trends at this point in time. I will say, however, it's clear that this is not like the financial crisis when I was last on the board. So I don't think we should manage this situation like we were dealing with the last crisis, because we're not, especially at this time. And one of the things I would say is that capital is higher than I've seen it, certainly when I was here on the board over a decade ago. I mean, we now have over 350 basis points beyond our statutory requirement of 7% regarding net worth. But again, the risk profile of the system appears to be changing. In slide 20, it shows an increase in CAMEL's 3 ratings for credit unions with $1 billion or more in assets. Questions. For the record, how are CAMEL's codes assigned? Is it strictly from examiners? Do the call report data factor into the CAMEL's codes, or is this outside of examiner input?
So we do have some guidance out there for our examiners and even a letter to credit unions to the industry that discusses how CAMEL's ratings are assigned. So NCUA does assign those based on information that we've gathered, reviewed, and that the examiner has evaluated. They look at assessment levels and assign directions of risk there too. And then we have both a composite CAMEL rating and some component ratings, and all of that is described in those the examiner's guide in the letter to credit unions that we talked about as well. So examiners are expected to use their professional judgment and evaluate both those qualitative factors that would come from the call report, or I'm sorry, quantitative factors from the call report and other qualitative factors as they're reviewing scope tests and performing the examination.
Well, Kelly, thank you, but you were a little ahead of me because I was going to ask about the call reports. So are any of the priorities set forth within the call reports for them as well?
So an examiner does review the accuracy of the call report as part of the examination. They also would look at the financial performance report data that comes out of that call report as part of their assessment of the credit union. But we do keep in mind that the call report data is usually a lagging indicator of financial performance. So they would also look at, other types of quantitative factors like economic data as well.
Great, thank you. And then for the change this quarter in CAMELS data, how much of this can be attributed to us being on site for examinations for the first time in probably over 2 years now?
Yeah, so I know we have mentioned before that the NCUA anticipates fraud discovery may increase as a result of us going back on site. It might be difficult, though, to attribute how many of our CAMELS, declines are due to that being more on site at this point. That concludes my response.
Something we're going to certainly want to watch and monitor in the days ahead. For the CAMELS 3 changes over credit unions with $500 million and the 2 large credit unions with CAMELS 4 and 5 ratings, are the problems at all due to temporary declines in investments or other issues?
So I have taken a look at those downgraded credit unions, the 3s, the 4s, and the 5s, and liquidity and interest rate risk are cited most frequently in those declines. But I wouldn't say that it's in particular, just because of those unrealized losses in their investment portfolio. We're looking at other things. Some of the other items that I noticed in terms of the downgrades, it's also credit risk, overall risk management. There were some audits and some accounting concerns, information security. So it runs the gamut, but I would say that liquidity and interest rate risk were cited most frequently.
Very well, then just wrapping things up slightly, can we look at slide 3, please? So Eugene, this may be to you. Looking at slide 3, full year's operating expenses at $208 million. How much above or below our share insurance fund budget is this final amount?
The $208 million is a combination of expenses that result from the overhead transfer rate, as well as the SIF administrative budget. That $208 million represents expenses that were incurred in 2022, and they are the result of budget activity associated with the 2022 budget, but also budget activity that was associated with prior year budgets where the obligation was not expensed until 2022. The total amount of expenses that could have been incurred in 2022 from the 2022 budget and the prior budgets had an upward limit of $226 million. Thus, the 2022 operating expenses from this analysis were about $18 million below what was available.
Very well, thank you. And now if we can switch to slide 5. So looking at slide 5, the allowance for loss in December was about 185 million. What percent of year-end insured shares would this be in basis points?
So that would be about 1%.
Okay.
In terms of basis points.
And if we exclude the tax medallion losses, what's the actual net loss in basis points for the share insurance fund in the last 5 years?
So I would say that actual net losses to the fund for the last 5 years, which would be 2018 to 2022, and excluding, as you stipulated, the taxi medallion losses, would be approximately $58.9 million or 0.4 basis points of insured shares. The actual net losses in 2022 were $9.8 million or 0.06 basis points.
Very well, thank you.
Also, I should note that when I'm conveying those statistics and figures, just to be clear, those are the actual losses from the AMAC 10-year loss report as of December 31st, 2022. And those figures may be different from the estimated share insurance losses upon time of failure from credit unions, which is the information that's typically presented on slide 6, which again is at time of failure. And then that can adjust over time as the assets and liabilities of the estate get managed to the estate's ultimate closure. Thank you.
And thank you for the response. And again, it just harkens as to why we're so excited about Corey Ferris and his new role in helping mitigate and manage a lot of these issues there at AMAC going forward. I have no further questions, but again, thank you, Otfo, thank you, Kelly, for all of your steadfast leadership in regarding the Share Insurance Fund.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Board Member Hood, and thank you to both of you for a very well-done presentation. That concludes our discussion on the Share Insurance Fund quarterly report. The second item on our agenda today is Proposed Rule, Part 701, Appendix B, Chartering and Field of Membership. Staff presenting, Rita Woods, Division Director of Consumer Access, Office of Credit Union Resources and Expansion, Rob Leonard, Compliance Officer, Office of General Counsel, and Ian Morena, Associate General Counsel, Office of General Counsel. Good morning to all three of you. Please begin when you are ready.
Good morning, Chairman Harper.
Good morning.
Vice Chairman Hoffman and Board Member Hood.
Good morning.
We are pleased to present a notice of proposed rulemaking developed by the Access Field of Membership Working Group to improve the NCUA's Chartering and Field of Membership Manual and promote more opportunities for consumers to receive quality credit union services. In addition to seeking comments about this proposed rule changes, this notice will also seek feedback from interested parties about potential future policy refinements to better facilitate the credit union access within our statutory framework. The Access FOM work group consisted of members of both the Office of General Counsel and the Office of Credit Union Resources and Expansion. As you know, our group is a component of the NCUA's larger initiative devoted toward advancing communities through credit, education, stability, and support. Our group evaluated the agency's recent experience with respect to field of membership policy and has 9 recommended substantive changes. 1 technical change to the Charter and Field of Membership Manual, formerly known as Appendix B to Part 701 of the NCUA's Rules and Regulations. The overriding goals of the proposed changes are to enhance consumer access to credit unions and to reduce duplicative or unnecessary administrative requirements wherever possible. Of the 9 proposed substantive changes, 4 would assist multiple common bond credit unions interested in adding underserved areas to their fields of membership by streamlining the application requirements and clarifying the role of the data and criteria other federal agencies provide related to underserved areas. 3 would simplify the application requirements for the community-based federal credit unions by eliminating the need to submit redundant or less useful information and provided a standard form for business and marketing plans. The proposal also calls for eliminating insured charter credit unions seeking to convert to a federal charter while serving the same community. 1 would expand the community-based field of membership affinities, recognize the growth of telecommuting and remote work for companies headquartered in a community. The final substantive change would allow all federal credit unions to better capture the ongoing bond between individuals within a field of membership and their immediate family members following the death of a member. The 1 technical correction included within the proposal provides more precise clarification about the process the agency follows to review and approve the character and fitness of proposed credit unions management team and officials. Rob will now discuss the proposed changes affecting the underserved area additions and the community charter requests. Rob.
Okay, thank you, Rita, and good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
Good morning. I would like to go into greater detail regarding the changes affecting the additions of underserved areas by federal multiple common bond charters. The first change addresses an unintended consequence of a chartering manual amendment that became final in 2017 related to rural districts. That amendment limited the geographic scope of communities based on rural districts to only those states in and adjacent to the credit union's headquarters. We did not mean for this to apply to multiple common bond credit unions requesting underserved areas. This proposed rule change provides clarification to distinguish between how the rule applies to community and multiple common bond charters. The second and third changes affecting underserved areas reconcile our chartering manual with the related requirements promulgated by the Community Development Financial Institutions arm of the United States Treasury. Specifically, we propose using general language in the chartering manual to indicate 1 component of having an area qualifying as an underserved area is to meet CDFI's definition of being an investment area. Currently, we list the specific ways in which an area could meet the economic distress requirements CDFI uses, such as median family income limits or statistics based upon poverty or unemployment. The more general language we propose allows NCUA to adapt to changes CDFI may elect to make from time to time without requiring our agency to make additional regulatory changes. In addition, our proposal eliminates the census block level as a basis for defining underserved areas to again be consistent with CDFI's current practices. The lowest geographic level now available for underserved areas is census tracts. The final change to our policy regarding underserved area additions pertains to the requirements for applicants to demonstrate that the area has significant unmet needs for credit union services. Credit unions will now be able to identify credit or depository needs in a distressed area without being confined to having the statement be a particular length and without having to submit redundant information often covered in other parts of their submissions. Okay, I would now like to turn our attention to the proposed rule changes affecting community charter conversions and expansions. First, the rule would include 3 changes to simplify the application requirements. Based on our assessment of redundancies with our current requirements, we propose simplifying the business and marketing plan to eliminate the need for credit unions to provide more granular details about their operations when the information is readily available elsewhere. In addition, we propose providing standardized fillable forms to credit unions to capture data in a uniform format and ideally avoid requiring applicants from submitting extraneous information. The third change to the application requirement involves state-chartered credit unions converting to a federal community charter. If the applicant proposes serving an area identical to or smaller than their current area, they would not need to submit a business or marketing plan since they already have a history of serving the entire area. They would only need to provide a statement indicating the basis for their selection of their service area, the products and services it would provide to low and moderate income members, and plan marketing efforts to the economically distressed portions of the community. In addition to improving the community charter conversion and expansion requirements, the proposal also calls for adding an additional affinity option to all community credit unions to address the greater prevalence of telecommuting and remote working arrangements. In addition to those who live, work, worship, or attend school in an area, the rule would also include employees paid from a legal entity headquartered in a community or rural district. Associate General Counsel Ian Marina will now discuss the changes outside the scope of the underserved area additions and community charter actions. Ian?
All right, thank you, Rob. Good morning. I'd like to address 2 final changes included with the proposed rule. The first proposed change would address situations where credit unions may be better able to serve people's needs following the death of a person within the federal credit union's field of membership. The second change would bring a citation in the chartering manual regarding applications for new charters into alignment with the agency's current practices. So first, under the current options available for federal credit unions to enroll what are called secondary members, those who have a relationship to someone within the existing field of membership, immediate family or household members of decedents are not eligible for membership unless the person was a spouse of the person who died while within the field of membership. As a result, credit unions could potentially lose the funds of decedents held in the credit union to another financial institution, along with any goodwill associated with a long-standing relationship the credit union had with the deceased member. To address this concern, the proposed rule would update the definition of secondary members for each common bond type to include every member of a decedent's immediate family or household for a 6-month period following that person's passing. Second, and this is the final change that we'll be discussing in our overview, the proposed rule includes an update to a reference in the chartering manual on the review of prospective officials for new credit unions. This is really a technical clarification that addresses where in the chartering manual it currently cites section 701.14 of NCUA's regulations, which really applies to newly chartered and troubled credit unions. This change would update that reference and instead cite Section 201C or 12 U.S. Code 1781C in the Federal Credit Union Act on the board's authority to disapprove a director or other management official of an applicant for credit union share insurance fund coverage, as well as Section 104 of the Act, 12 U.S. Code 1754, which addresses character and fitness of federal credit union subscribers. So the proposed change is not intended to alter the agency's current practices, instead bring the chartering manual into alignment with the current practice. So it's really intended solely to improve the accuracy and clarity of the manual. So that concludes our overview of the proposed changes, and I'll now turn it back over to Rita for some closing remarks.
Thanks, Ian. Our group believes the proposed regulatory changes would make it easier for federal credit unions to provide more access to reliable financial services to consumers. As such, we recommend the board approve releasing the notice of proposed rulemaking for a 90-day comment period. Thank you for the consideration. That concludes our presentation, and we'll be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you so much, Rita, Rob, and Ian, for your presentation today on this proposed rule to amend the NCUA's chartering and field of membership regulations with respect to the provision of financial services to under-resourced communities. Together, these changes would aid in expanding access to safe, fair, and affordable financial products and services to more households and communities across the country. I also know that you've spent more than a year working through these issues, and I am deeply appreciative of that. I'm also deeply appreciative of Board Member Hood's commitment to these issues. We started work here as part of the Access Initiative when you were chairman, and we've continued to follow through. Focusing on financial inclusion is so key to what we do in the credit union system. And ultimately, the changes we are considering here would improve that access to the financial system and help make ways to make more affordable financial products and services more available in rural communities, inner cities, and all other under-resourced areas in between. The credit union system is at its best when the dual chartering system is strong and vibrant. Yet with respect to the field of membership options, the federal charter often lags significantly behind state charters. According to an analysis done by the NCUA's Office of Credit Union Resources and Expansion, 91 of the 100 largest potential fields of membership in the country are state charters. Ultimately, it's Congress's decision whether to amend the Federal Credit Union Act's field of membership requirements to achieve greater parity with the rules that are in place in many states. However, when we can, within our existing rules and the law's current requirements, the NCUA board should take appropriate and tailored action to simplify, streamline, and strengthen federal chartering options. Together, these 9 proposed changes won't close the wide gap between the field of membership options for federal and state charters, but they will make some meaningful changes to enhance consumer access to financial products and services. The proposal would also make technical corrections, as were noted, to clarify the process for the NCUA's reviews of chartering and field of membership changes. This rule is important because it's taking away unnecessary paperwork burdens. It's also applying common sense. And I really want to thank you all for spending so much time working through this. I plan to support this proposed rule, and I look forward to reviewing the comments. But I do have just one question. The USA's current rules reiterate the U.S. Treasury Department's Community Development Financial Institutions Fund's economic distress criteria that have been in place for nearly 15 years. But as I understand it, the FI fund is also now proposing changes to its certification and its recertification processes. Would those proposed changes to the CDFI's rules affect the economic distress criteria that we are using? Because I wouldn't want to necessarily have a conflict there, and then us only have to go and change our rules yet again.
Certainly, I'd be happy to answer that question,
Thank you, Rita.
Chairman. So our proposed change would essentially gives us an elastic clause whereby we can adapt the changes that CDFI makes as released to investment areas, so that when, we wouldn't have to make any additional changes to our rules. So the certification or recertification that CDFI is doing has no impact, actually, on these proposed changes and overall does not affect the charter and field of membership.
Great. Thank you, Rita. In sum, this proposed rule makes modest but important modifications to the agency's field of membership regulations and chartering rules for federal credit unions. I thank both the staff for their excellent work and, again, my fellow board member for his vision and foresight. That concludes my remarks. I now recognize the Vice Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And thank you, Rita, Robert, Ian, for your presentation. A lot of work went into this, so I thank everyone for their effort on it. I also want to thank Board Member Hood for his leadership on access. That's our advancing communities through credit, education, stability, and support. That's an initiative to increase the agency's focus on enabling credit unions to serve underserved, unserved, and disadvantaged communities. And what a great mission that is. And I'll say it's one of the reasons I love this job. Back in 1998, when Congress amended the Federal Credit Union Act, Congress reiterated its support for credit unions, emphasizing their specific mission of meeting the credit and saving needs of consumers, especially persons of modest means, end quote. That 1998 bill includes the express provision for NCUA board to establish regulations that encourage the chartering of community and multiple common bond federal credit unions, including provisions for encouraging formation of federal credit unions to provide financial services to underserved communities and people of modest means. And obviously, they're supposed to do so in a safe and sound manner. In that 1998 bill, Congress directed the board to consider multiple responsibilities, including encouraging access to financial services for people of modest means, encouraging competition among providers of financial services, and protecting taxpayers by enhancing the safety and soundness of the credit union system and protecting our share insurance fund. The board's goals in revising the chartering and field of membership manual are following. 1, increase access for underserved communities. 2, providing objective criteria to potential applicants. 3, providing reg relief while balancing safety and soundness concerns. And 4, enhancing efficiency. The clarity sought by this proposed rule will allow credit unions and this agency to better fulfill Congress's intent. Clear regulation is good regulation. Understanding field of membership is not so easy. So when we amend the rules, it's done to improve precision and simplicity. This proposed rule seeks to clarify existing chartering and field of membership rules for multiple common bond federal credit unions and for community federal credit unions. The Federal Credit Union Act authorizes multiple common bond federal credit unions to serve members residing in a, quote, underserved area, provided they have a physical facility there. The Federal Credit Union Act defines underserved area as a local community, neighborhood, or rural district that meets the definition in the 1994 CDFI Act. Basically, it's underserved by other depository institutions. This definition of underserved by other depository institutions is based on data from NCUA statistical analysis and by federal banking agencies. The CDFI fund's supplemental guidance allows data showing a lack of financial institution branches in an investment area to help meet its significant unmet needs requirement. NCUA relies on CDFI for determining if an area meets this investment area criteria. The proposed changes in this rule do several things. 1, apply the CDFI fund's economic distress criteria as required by the Federal Credit Union Act. 2, clarify that the NCUA defers to the CDFI fund and eliminates census block groups as a geographic unit for composing underserved areas. 3, clarifies flexibility for multiple common bond federal credit unions serving underserved area based on rural districts. And 4th and finally, streamlines the existing requirement, the statement of unmet needs that accompanies a request to serve an underserved area. So that was a lot. But as the chairman mentioned, the proposed rule would also eliminate the business plan requirement for certain federally insured state chartered credit unions that seek to convert to a federal charter serving the same field of membership. So this is a credit union that already exists, and even if they're state chartered, we're still their insurer. We should already have a handle on whether or not their business plan works or not. So there's no reason for the credit union to do the paperwork, nor any reason for us at NCUA to review this paperwork. Again, if they have an unsound business mind, we'd be a bad insurer if we didn't already know that. The proposal will also allow all federal credit unions to better capture the ongoing bond between individuals within a field of membership and their immediate family members following the death of a member. This rule has a 90-day comment period, and I look forward to seeing the input by stakeholders Whether you agree with the changes or not, I think we agree that serving the underserved is an important objective. I should also note that anything that clarifies field of membership also clarifies things for groups seeking a de novo charter. The chartering process is one of my main 3 priorities, so I'm glad to see us move on policies that make it more likely that a community or group can charter a new viable credit union. True financial inclusion means reducing unnecessary burdens on groups trying to bring a new financial institution to their community. So now I have a few questions. Will using more general references to CDFI's requirements for investment areas make it easier or harder for a multiple common bond credit union to add an underserved area? Anybody can take that.
I'd be glad to take that. No, it really should not change the difficulty in any way. What the goal is to provide clarity for what the rule is. A lot of the changes CDFI has made over the years has become, there's been a lot of advances in the Census Bureau's processes for providing statistical information, but mainly by moving from the decennial census data to the American Community Survey, which is ongoing. So what the CDFI is also, as they've gotten more comfortable with it, they've changed their requirements over time to have more current information available. So basically what the rule will do is it will provide clarity, but it will not increase burden, it will just provide clarity and make it easier for using the existing structure. So that concludes my response.
Gotcha. I just have one more. So the rule has changes for credit unions that are contemplating big adjustments to their field of membership. Will any of these changes have an impact on federal credit unions that are content with who they already serve?
I'll take that question. So yes, actually, the proposed new affinity that Rob spoke about in his details of persons paid from companies headquartered within a community would give existing community charters an opportunity to serve potential members who are more apt to, to have employees that are working now remote. I mean, this would afford credit unions, over 1,000 credit unions, an opportunity to amend their community charter as a mere housekeeping amendment if this rule, if this proposal was to get finalized. And then secondly, the rule affecting members of the immediate family members that we spoke about or households of decedents can help credit unions maintain relationships with people who may not realize that, that they were eligible for membership when the family member or household member was living. So there again, this would affect over 2,000, a little over 2,900 credit unions, that could potentially, add this language to their field of membership.
Anybody have a handle on how many people out there may gain access to a credit union based on this?
Well, I mean, based on the population of the country, there's, I mean, it's hard to say. Honestly, it would be very hard.
I know it's hard to say. It's a big country, and there's a lot of underserved areas, unfortunately. And
Yes.
hopefully, we've done this in a way that it is useful for credit unions. If it is not,
I hope that the number of people who benefit from the rule exceeds the number of NCUA employees that worked on the rule. Do that.
I hope so.
Back to Chairman Hubbard.
I'm going to take a back of the envelope guess in answering your question. It was 333 million.
Yeah.
Let's assume everybody lives to 100. So 3.3 million a year people die. 1/3 of that is in the credit union system. So that's 1.1 million.
Yep.
But you've got to multiply it by, let's say that somebody who passes has 5 immediate family members. Actually, no, let's tighten that up because the mom, the spouse, and a kid and a half.
Sure.
We'll go up to 3. So I'm going to go 3.3 million.
You got it. At work.
There you go. Board member Hood.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. But also I want to thank you, Rita, Rob, and Ian for joining us. I think, is this your first time at the board table, Rita?
No, sir. I was here under FOM 1.
My, a while ago. Well, it's good to have you all here in person today. How's that?
Thank you.
And I certainly want to thank Chairman Harper for his support of the Access Initiative, which I was really fortunate to work with him, and now Vice Chairman Hauptman on the initiative, Advancing Communities Through Credit, Education, Stability, and Support. It's something that I really do think is the crux of our credit union system in terms of helping serve marginalized communities. And today's proposed rule is clearly a step in the right direction. For example, I'm glad it makes it easier for family members of deceased family members to join a credit union. In fact, Ian, you were mentioning in your comments, yes, we often have a family member that passes away. The estate is cleared, and for some reason, the family members cannot keep those assets within that credit union. They ended up having to go to a non-credit union financial services provider. So I'm glad that this rulemaking is going to help that. I'm also glad that NCUA board is recognizing in today's proposed rule that hybrid work is impacting the traditional definition of affinity groups for community charters, namely people who live, worship, attend school or work in the community or in a rural district. Today's proposed rule attempts to capture remote work employees as affinity groups for community charters. This is indeed, in my opinion, a very positive development. But we have much more to build upon in this rule and from previous field of membership rulemakings. Serving the underserved, as you all know, has really been a hallmark of my time on the NCUA board, but more must be done to increase credit union access in rural, minority, disabled, and tribal communities, among other communities, where currently all they may have in that area is a pernicious predatory payday lender. Personally, I believe the best way to do this is to allow mobile phones to serve as service facilities. For us to continue to use an antiquated definition of a service facility is not responsible in my view. When the Federal Credit Union Act was signed into law in 1934, I venture to say that no one living at that time could have imagined ATMs. Yet with the advent of ATMs, our regulations evolved to consider how ATMs represent a service facility. In 2023, the reality of that mobile banking is that it's the way that some of our 134 million members of credit unions are now served by their credit unions. Again, nearly 134 million of our credit union members are using mobile banking as a primary way of engaging. And as I have mentioned from this board table, more and more credit unions, as the members are using these phones, let's see what we as a board can do going forward to allow for mobile applications and digital delivery systems to meet service facility requirements. I think if we've learned anything since the COVID-19 pandemic, we should recognize again that members are using the phones and internet banking at a higher rate than they are actually in going to the branches. In my view, the regulator must respond to changes in technology, just like credit unions are having to do so as well. To that end, I do have a few questions. How does the agency address areas in which large bodies of water fall between land masses? This has consistently come up when I've met with leagues in Alaska and Hawaii with the credit unions.
Mr. Hood, I'd be happy to address that question. So OGC and CURE work cooperatively on these issues to review unique areas such as those that you mentioned. And the overall policy goal is to ensure that for a local community or rural district, it remains well defined. So that's one of the considerations or a key consideration, and it's a really fact-intensive issue. But one of the notable things that the proposed rule includes is a question for commenters regarding whether or how the well-defined requirement applies to underserved areas. So that might be a particularly informative area for commenters to give input on these situations. So I hope that response is helpful.
It is very helpful, and I will certainly highlight that as I'm out talking about this when some of my upcoming events. In the proposal, a multiple common bond credit union could consider adding a rural district as an underserved area, even if the area is not contiguous to the state in which the credit union maintains its headquarters. The prior board included this restriction for community charters based on rural districts to avoid having the areas become, quite frankly, too expansive. For the record, why is the NCUA board proposing this exception now, and would this again specifically impact states like Hawaii and Alaska?
Oh, Mr. Hood, I'd be happy to try to address that question as well. So as Rob mentioned earlier, the intent in FOM1, which was finalized in 2017, was to address these areas that could be very expansive as rural districts with population up to 1 million. They could be very challenging for a credit union to serve, given the population density and possible sparse population among various states. However, this situation is not as pronounced for underserved areas because there are other inherent constraints on how an underserved area is composed, including distress requirements of the CDFI fund, which Rob had discussed previously, and also the requirement to be underserved by other depository institutions. In addition, credit unions need to have a business and marketing plan as well as a service facility in the area. So with these constraints and parameters, That's what shaped the framework for proposing this change. And there, of course, is additional discussion in the proposed rule, but those are some of the salient points on what supported that proposed change. I hope that's responsive.
It's very responsive and a very robust response. It is that as well, Ian. And for the record, can you explain, maybe this is you, it could be to one of, it could be to you, Rita, or Rob. I don't want to sort of pinpoint who gets to answer the question, but for the record, can you explain what the concentration of facilities test is for underserved areas? See, that wasn't you, Ian, so aren't you glad I did that?
Thank you, sir.
No, well, I'd be glad to answer that question. Mr.
Thank you.
But basically, what we're, with the, as Mr. Hoffman was, when he was citing the CDFI regulation or law, one of the requirements is that an underserved area has to be underserved by other depository institutions. What we did in 2008 to help us reconcile with that requirement was we developed a proposal for the facilities test. And what that does is it measures the relative availability of financial services in distressed parts of an area with the non-distressed. So if the number of people per branch is higher, it shows that there's basically less availability of financial services. So we would basically use that as a basis for comparing.
Very well, thank you, Rob. So then, again, if I understand this correctly, then, so prior to 2009, we did not do a concentration of facilities tests. So this was a creation, I dare say, of NCUA, intended to help the agency to meet our statutory responsibilities. While the CFT is a well-intentioned test originally designed to help identify the concentration of depository institutions, some credit unions have approached me with concerns about the application and timeliness of the test. So I'm wondering that after 15 years of experience with CFT, is it time to re-examine this test at all?
Yes, I think it's always worthwhile to look at our procedures to see what we could make better or not. There are possibilities that the test does occasionally not identify pockets in the country where it doesn't make sense. I do note, though, the current rule does allow credit unions, if they have a methodology based on federal banking data, that they can submit that for consideration too, if the facilities test doesn't work, for example.
Great, thank you.
So, yeah.
Oh, no, keep going.
No, I was just saying, so I would suggest, though, that they should talk with CURE before sending that in to make sure that, that they're on the same page in terms of meeting the requirements.
Great, thank you. But I am glad to know they can use other readily available data. I know we talked about that extensively during our briefing
Yes.
on today's matter. And I agree with you that I do think it's appropriate to take a hard look at the test, not only from the perspective of identifying additional areas that might be overlooked, but also from an efficiency and effectiveness standard as well. Although, as you state, most of the time, the underserved areas pass the CFT either as submitted or modified from their original request. It would seem to me that with the data and resources that are available to us, we should be able to let credit unions know the results of the CFT in a much more timely fashion. While I can appreciate that more evaluation is expected to take place during future rulemakings, I certainly would like to see a concerted effort to expedite the process presently and until such time that meaningful revisions and reforms can be applied to our current methodology. So with that, you all, thank you for your hard work. Proud to see this proposed rulemaking before us today, and of course, I'll be supporting it quite enthusiastically.
Thank you.
Thank you, Board Member Hood, not only for your comments today, but for your leadership on this issue. And I'm going to have to revise my estimate for you because I forgot that not everybody passes on money when in an estate after somebody dies. So I'm going to take it down by a half to 1.6. With that, Vice Chairman Huffman, is there a motion?
Yes, sir. I move that the board approve proposed rule, Part 701, Appendix B of NCUA's Rules and Regulations for a 90-day comment period as attached to the board action memorandum.
Is there a second to the motion?
Second.
There is a sufficient second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed say nay. The ayes have it, and let the record show that the motion passes 3-0. Thank you all. You are an extraordinary group of people who have really dived down into the details about what our field of membership rules are and what they can accomplish and how they can be changed. I venture to say that whatever years of experience you have at the agency. We really should multiply that by at least 2, if not 3, for what you bring to the table. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
And I
you.
also share the recognition with our colleagues that couldn't be here today. too.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Great, thank you.
Absolutely.
We're so glad to see you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
The third and final item on our agenda today is Final Rule Part 748, Cyber Incident Notification Requirements for Federally Insured Credit Unions. Staff presenting, Kelly Lay, Director, Office of Examination and Insurance. Christina Sari, Information Systems Officer, Office of Examination and Insurance. And staff available for questions, Gira Bose, Senior Staff Attorney, Office of General Counsel. Kelly, Christina, and Gira, you're now recognized.
Thank you. Good morning again, Chairman Harper, Vice Chairman Hopman, and Board Member Hood. Christina, Gira, and I are here to present a final rulemaking on cyber incident notification requirements for federally insured credit unions. The board is considering the cyber incident notification requirements final rule largely as proposed. No changes were made to the proposed rule text. The final rule will give the NCUA early notice of substantial cyber incidents that have consequences for federally insured credit unions. The rule would require a federally insured credit union to notify the NCUA of any cyber incident that rises to the level of a reportable cyber incident as soon as possible, but not later than 72 hours after a federally insured credit union reasonably believes that a reportable cyber incident has occurred. The effective date of this rule would be no earlier than September 1st, 2023, to give the agency and credit unions sufficient time for implementation. Now, Christina will discuss the details of the final rule.
Thank you, Kelly. Good morning, everyone.
Good
I am
morning.
Christina Sari. As first stated in the proposed rule and finalized here, the rule adds a provision to 12 CFR 748.1 for the NCUA to require notification of any cyber incident that rises to the level of a reportable cyber incident as soon as possible, but no later than 72 hours after a federally insured credit union reasonably believes that a reportable cyber incident has occurred. The proposed rule defined a cyber incident as an occurrence that actually or imminently jeopardizes without lawful authority the integrity, confidentiality, or availability of information on an information system. The proposed rule defined a reportable cyber incident as a substantial cyber incident that leads to one or more of the following: a substantial loss of confidentiality, integrity, or availability of a network or member information system that results from the unauthorized access or to the exposure of sensitive data that disrupts vital member services or has a serious impact on the safety and resiliency of operational systems and processes, and/or a disruption of business operations, vital member services, or member information system resulting from a cyber attack or exploitation of vulnerabilities, and/or a disruption of business operations or unauthorized access to sensitive data facilitated through or caused by a compromise of a credit union service organization, cloud service provider, managed service provider, or other third-party data hosting provider, or by a supply chain compromise. The proposed rule definition excluded any event where the cyber incident was performed in good faith by an entity in response to a specific request by the owner or operator of the information system. To the extent possible and appropriate for the credit union system, the final rule uses terminology and a reporting framework that Congress outlined in the Cyber Incident Reporting for Critical Infrastructure Act of 2022. We refer to this as the Cyber Incident Reporting Act. The Cyber Incident Reporting Act will require covered entities to report covered cyber incidents to the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, CISA, not later than 72 hours after the entity reasonably believes that a covered cyber incident has occurred. The board believes it is in the best interest of the credit union system to align NCUA's rule with the Cyber Incident Reporting Act to provide uniform and timely cyber incident reporting. It is the intention of the board for the NCUA to coordinate with CISA on any future credit union cyber incident reporting to avoid duplicative reporting to both CISA and the NCUA. The proposed rule provided for a 60-day public comment period. A vast majority of the commenters supported the rule and agreed with the 72-hour reporting timeframe. After considering the comments, there were no changes made to the text of the rule. Only a minor change was made to to an example in the preamble to clarify that an incident would only be considered reportable under this rule if a federally insured credit union has a relationship with a third party that has been compromised. The board understands the need for the flexibility during a cyber incident. Thus, the rule allows for reportable cyber incidents to be reported via email, telephone, or other similar methods. The board also understands that the time period right after a cyber incident can be hectic, and credit unions will rightly be focused on recovery. Therefore, the NCUA will generally limit follow-up during such incidents to minimize burden on federally insured credit unions. The NCUA will be providing more detailed reporting guidance before the effective date of the rule. The guidance will include cyber incident reference card, a checklist for cyber incidents reports, additional examples on what should or not be reported, and, as noted in the rule preamble, we encourage federally insured credit unions to reach out to the agency in the event they have concerns or questions about the reporting. This concludes the presentation, and we are happy to have any questions you have.
Thank you so much, Christina, Kelly, Gira, for your presentation on the final rule on cyber incident notification requirements for federally insured credit unions. My heartfelt thanks goes out to the teams from the Office of Examination and Insurance, as well as the Office of General Counsel and others in the agency who worked on this rule. Their joint efforts in finalizing this measure will fortify and strengthen the cyber defenses of our nation's financial services sector. Cybersecurity is an issue that often keeps me up at night. I suspect that others also cite it as the most common reason for their sleeplessness, including my fellow board members. As such, I want to express my gratitude to Vice Chairman Hauptman and Board Member Hood for their support of this rulemaking and their contributions to this final rule. This final rule is largely unchanged from the proposed rule approved last July. It sets the parameters for what constitutes a reportable incident and the minimum notification requirements. Under this rule, a credit union must notify the NCUA as soon as possible, but no later than 72 hours after it reasonably believes a reportable cyber incident has occurred. Through these high-level early warning notifications, the NCUA will be able to work with other agencies and the private sector to respond to cyber threats before they become systemic and threaten the broader financial system. This final rule will also align the NCUA's reporting requirements with those of the federal banking agencies, as well as the Cyber Incident Reporting and Critical Infrastructure Act. On this point, I do want to thank the Vice Chairman for his suggestion that the final rule include language noting that the NCUA will coordinate with the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency on any future credit union cyber incident reporting requirements to avoid duplicative reporting to both agencies. I've long believed that we should work to improve the efficiency of agencies by streamlining rules and regulations whenever possible. So this addition is much appreciated. You know, quite frankly, you probably have the same frustration I do when you go to the doctor's office. And on every single form, you've got to write your name and your birth date and your phone number. And you think, I already entered it here. Why do I need to repeat
My
it?
birth date is the same as it was on the page before.
Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. And I just find that so frustrating. So I'm glad that we're going to work to the extent that we can to make sure that it's a one-stop shop. So you don't have to do multiple or duplicative reporting overall. Each of us in the financial system has an obligation to protect our nation's economic and financial infrastructure, and credit unions must be included in conversations about this critical infrastructure overall. This final rule will facilitate such a dialogue. Additionally, this final rule is just one of several actions that the NCUA has recently taken to improve the system's cyber resiliency. Earlier this year, for example, the agency launched the Information Security Examination Program, or ICE for short. ICE standardizes the examination of credit union information security and cybersecurity programs, and it enhances the NCUA's ability to identify deficiencies. ICE is also flexible and can adapt to credit union asset sizes and complexity levels to assist the credit union system in preparing for, withstanding, and recovering from cybersecurity threats. While the Cybersecurity Incident Notification Rule and ICE will help in the fight against cyber attacks, we still need to confront a regulatory blind spot that continues to exist because the NCUA lacks the authority, the same authority the banking regulators have, to exercise a risk-based approach to supervising third-party vendors. Unfortunately, cyber risk in the credit union system often lurks in the ether beyond the NCUA's purview within the credit union service organizations and the third-party service providers that provide services to credit unions on the same level as bank vendors. As a result, thousands of credit unions, tens of millions of consumers who use credit unions, and roughly $2 trillion in assets are exposed to potentially devastating risks. The Government Accountability Office, the Financial Stability Oversight Council, and the NCUA's Office of Inspector General have all recommended congressional action to fix this blind spot. I agree with these experts. Restoring the NCUA's authority over credit union service organizations and third-party vendors will bolster our nation's economic security. It will also give credit union members the same level of protections that bank customers currently enjoy. As such, the NCUA will continue to engage with Congress on this important legislative issue. Before I conclude my remarks, I do have just one question. And Christina, you started to talk about it during your presentation, but I was hoping you could dive a little bit deeper into the details about the guidance that we will issue. Is this guidance going to outline the scenarios when a notification is needed and when it is not?
Yes, we definitely, our guidance will include examples beyond what we currently have in the preamble, and it will show when you need to report, and then also instances when you would not need to report. So that will also be included in our guidance.
So the receipt of a phishing email, report or not report?
Not, well, once again,
It depends.
However, if it is just a phishing email and there's no further action, probably not reportable.
Okay, so you're working with your vendor in order to do a fail-safe test when something goes wrong and all the members of the credit union lose access to their online services. Report, not report?
Depending on the time frame they're down, that will most likely be reportable.
Okay, great. Christine, I'm looking forward to seeing that guidance, and thank you for your insights as well as all of your good work here at the table as well as in the offices to get this final rule across the finish line. I now recognize the Vice Chairman.
Thank you, sir, and thanks to staff for this well-written rule. There is no question that cybersecurity and incident reporting are critically important. The sooner NCUA is aware of an incident, the sooner it can determine whether it's isolated or widespread. As Christina mentioned, the comment letters overwhelmingly supported the need for the rule. And if we do this correctly, this could lead to fewer cyber incidents overall, because you can give a heads up to the credit union world that there's a virus out there, et cetera, and it's possible a 5-minute patch that you put on your systems could save days of effort and mayhem. So it's not just about reporting cyber incidents. If we do this right, there can be fewer of them. As important as the rule is, we recognize the crush of regulatory compliance is never ending, and it comes from all directions. The weight of regulatory burden is especially heavy for smaller credit unions, and it's often cited when small credit unions merge with another. The only people who think compliance is easy are people who don't have to do it. Today's rule is about reporting to NCUA only. NCUA is issuing the rule now rather than waiting until 2025 when CISA releases its final rule. The board believes it's in the best interest of the credit union system to align our rule with the Cyber Incident Reporting Act to provide uniform and timely cyber incident reporting. It is our intention to coordinate with CISA on any future credit union cyber incident reporting to avoid duplicate reporting to both NCUA and CISA. This seems like the best way to serve credit unions, the best way to serve CISA, and to serve NCUA. Report it to one agency and it's automatically forwarded in some mechanism. I don't pretend to know how, but everybody gets it immediately. Nobody has to wait on NCUA. And if I was CISA, this is what I would want. Preferably, credit unions report to NCUA. We report to CISA. And a few other items of note. Requirements for notifying credit union members and the public are unchanged. Credit unions are being asked to report as soon as possible and not later than 72 hours after the incident. The time frame of 72 hours is consistent with what CISA will require in 2025. Credit unions are not required to provide a detailed incident assessment to NCUA within the 72-hour time frame. Remember, the priority when things happen is speed of reporting. You can get to the details later. NCUA also does not publicly name credit unions that report cyber incidents. So let me ask a couple questions. The rule is expected to take effect this September, 2023. So in general, what steps are we taking to streamline the reporting process?
Sure, I can take that question. So there are a couple ways we are looking to streamline it. First of all, this is notification. So we're not looking for an assessment. We're not looking for an evaluation of the incident. We're just looking for notification of that the incident has happened. In addition, we're making it flexible to report. You can report by email. You can report, by telephone or any other type of method that you're getting in touch with the NCUA. So that's one way that we're trying to make it as easy as possible. Another way is, we are providing that guidance. So in addition to, as part of this guidance, we are putting out a cyber incident reference card. We are putting out a checklist for cyber incident response and additional examples on what should or should not be reported. We are also will be holding a webinar for industry in the future.
Gotcha. And you mentioned in your presentation 3 broad situations that could trigger an incident. Where did those 3 situations come from?
So I'll take that question. So the final rule does use terminology and a reporting framework that Congress outlined in the Cyber Incident Reporting for Critical Infrastructure Act of 2022, and we've referred to that throughout the final rule as the Cyber Incident Reporting Act.
Gotcha. How are we doing? We talked about a cheat sheet. If you're the person in charge of reporting, like a wallet card, something taped to your desk. The reason I'm using sort of very manual analog things is because by definition, your internet may be down, your email may be out. And the easier it is to know what to report and how to report, the more likely this is done effectively. How are we doing on that?
I'll take that question. So that is what Christina was referring to as the Cyber Incident Reference Card. It will definitely be included as part of our materials for credit unions. Okay. That concludes my response.
We're referring to the CISA agency. That's a subset of Department of Homeland Security?
Yes.
That's housed within it? Okay. And we're talking to CISA now. We're engaged in multi-party discussions around how to do this. Obviously, in 2025, there may well be a new DHS secretary. There's an election next year. The secretary could change anyway. Cabinet, this is just the way the political process is. You have these long conversations with a group of people, you think you have agreement, and then a whole bunch of new people come in who were not prior to it. That's why I wanted to have something in the rule that at least it's our thought that the best way to do it for all parties would be just to report. But let's say, fast forward to 2025, nobody's around at DHS or CISA because of the political process or what have you that remembers any of this. What do we do then? And to help you out on this, what I'm trying to get at is, if the new folks have a different view than the old folks did, will we do everything we can to change our process, if that's what CISA needs, to try to streamline it so you report to your prudential regulator and that gets the job done?
I'll take that question. So we did feel it was important to, get a final rule on the books right now, just so that we can start gathering this information, right? Becoming aware of cyber incidents, given the prevalence of, attacks and cybersecurity risk out there right now. But a couple of years in the future, things change. We can definitely take a look at our rule and change our rule if it makes it easier for credit unions or to work with CISA and what those final rules look like in 2025.
So it seems like there's 2 flows. We'll work in a couple of years if needed, what is reported and how it's reported to NCUA. And then the second flow is NCUA giving the information to CISA in some manner via some mechanism. And we're willing to work with them, even if it's brand new folks who've never heard of this, on either of those flows to hopefully make this easier on all parties. Is that correct?
Yes, and we are already part of a cyber incident reporting council working with CISA and other, federal banking regulators, as well as other government agencies on what that process looks like.
I hear you on that, and I appreciate everybody's work on that. But I've been part of these, and then it's a whole bunch of new people. This happened when I was on the Hill. So, well, no, Congress, the expectation was that the agency would do this. Well, can you point me to anything that says their expectation? Everybody wished that they'd thrown down a marker somewhere, but we couldn't actually show anything. So that's what I'm trying to
Well, I
get
could
at.
just note
Please.
that Congress does, in the Cyber Incident Reporting Act, contemplate some harmonization between the agencies. They do express an interest in having agencies enter into MOUs with CISA, so there will not be this duplication. I mean, how that will manifest itself in the future is yet to be seen, but there is some contemplation by Congress that what you're suggesting would happen.
Gotcha. And the reason I want to be specific, and I appreciate that info, I went through the situation once where we said, yeah, we're going to harmonize. We said all the good words, and we're going to avoid duplication. And what it wound up being was they said, no, the people out there in the private sector, they send the same info to two different agencies. We're going to make it easy on you instead of just automating it to both agencies. Their view, looking at all these good words, harmonization, remove duplication. No, you're all set. It's going to be the same form. You send two different forms. We're not trying to make it easy by having the same info to two agencies. We're trying to make it easy by having one set of info to one agency that automatically goes to the other. The only reason I have anxiety over this is because I went through this recently, and everybody wishes we'd been more specific back when we did it. But that's it. Back to Chairman.
Thank you so much. Board Member Hood?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I also want to thank Kelly, Christina, and Gira for today's presentation. And special thanks to the Vice Chairman for really taking the efforts to make sure that this rule was more transparent, but also avoiding duplication. So thank you, and I'm sure our credit unions appreciate that as well. As I meet with regulators from all over the globe, I must say that the chairman was right. Cybersecurity is something that tops the mind of every regulator, whether they're here in the United States or abroad. It is a really pressing issue. And after all these years, with cybersecurity being top of mind, I wish we could all say that having focused on this threat for such a long time, that we are making progress toward a real sustainable solution. But unfortunately, that's simply not the case, given the velocity and evolution of cybersecurity threats. As such, we have to accept that cybersecurity threats are an ongoing risk, both to financial institutions' operations and their reputations as well. Moreover, we have to accept that the risk is a moving target. Today's final rule reflects this present reality. Every credit union must recognize that their institution is just one wrong email or malicious link away from being on the front pages. Given those realities, even those of us who favor a more balanced approach to regulatory matters, we must recognize that the agency's cybersecurity review and supervision capabilities need to be more robust. Today's final rule is a step forward in that endeavor. Gone are the days when you had a vendor provide credit unions with an add-on patch to address a vulnerability and simply move on. Today, we need to rethink defense in depth when it comes to cybersecurity. That means not only addressing vulnerabilities and recognizing threats, but also having response plans in place that not only identify vulnerabilities, but also catch attacks in real time and proactively prevent their impact on a credit union. With that said, you all, I do have a few quick questions. Although this rule does not take effect until September, do credit unions have a responsibility now before the rule's effective date if a cyber incident occurs, for the record?
I can take that question. Now, although the rule will not be effective until September 2023, credit unions are still urged to report under our current guidance of 748 Appendix B to report unauthorized use of sensitive member information to the regional director. So that still is in place. So we would still encourage credit unions to report that.
Great, and we talked about this during the briefing. I did not want anyone to think that until September they could be on holiday when it comes to reporting.
Correct.
Very well. And one final, how does this final rule differ from what the banks are doing?
So there are really two major differences. First, obviously, the time frame, that 36 hours. So under the Federal Banking Agency's rule, a banking organization's primary federal regulator must be notified within 36 hours. And the second big difference is the bank service providers. So the bank service providers actually must notify a banking point of contact if they believe that their service will be down for more than 4 hours, or if they believe that their service will be down for 4 hours. So those are the two key differences between us and the Federal Banking Agency's rules.
Well, I was just pleased that we are at least giving our folks an additional 36 hours to remediate the situation, address it, and keep their members top of mind. So that was one of the things that I was very pleased to see. I am supporting today's rule, and I have no further questions. But thank you all for your hard work in getting us here today.
Thank you so much, Board Member Hood. Is there a motion?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I move that the board approve final rule, Part 748 of NCUA's Rules and Regulations as attached to the board action memorandum.
Is there a second to the motion?
I second the motion.
There is a sufficient second. All those in favor say aye.
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 All those opposed say nay. The ayes have it, and let the record show that the motion passed 3-0. Before gaveling out our board meeting today, I would like to give a shout out to all of the great work that went into issuing the first charter of 2023. For members only, Federal Credit Union has an associational common bond consisting of the members of Alpha Kappa Alpha sorority, their members, and employees. Alpha Kappa Alpha is one of the Divine Nine historic African American sororities and fraternities, and its mission is to be of service to all mankind. That mission is at the heart of the credit union movement. CURE staff who worked on this new charter include Tricia Mickley, Consumer Access Coordinator in the Office of Credit Union Resources and Expansion, as well as Sue Ryan, Consumer Access Division Director in the same office. I want to thank them both for their very good work. That concludes the shout out from my end, but I think you probably want to say something as well.
100%. As I said earlier in the meeting, the de novo process is one of my top 3 priorities, and I consider it true financial inclusion, that we don't just talk about it. An entity or a geographic area, any field of membership, they obviously are not 100% satisfied with their current financial services providers, or else they wouldn't be trying to create a new one. I'm proud that we've streamlined the process. I believe we're talking about a provisional charter that can get rid of sort of the chicken and egg problem, where you can't get money to have a charter, you can't get a charter to have money. I think it's terrific that the folks at AKA have now got a new credit union for their members. I also want to say, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Chairman, we've got a general agreement that, you know how we had the SIF update today? We do that every quarter. Once a year, we'll do an update on de novo process, right? How the pipeline's going, measuring it. The newer ones of the last year or two that have been chartered, how they're doing. We recognize that there will be some that fail, and we as a board have to walk the walk, meaning, or merge, et cetera, with someone else. But the main priority, especially since they're almost always small risks to the fund, new charters are almost always very small, that we consider chartering core to what we do, and we have the absolute best process that meets the needs of members that may want a brand new financial services provider, and obviously an insurer that has to insure it. So congratulations to the folks at AKA. Respect to our CURE team for moving them through that process, and that concludes my remarks.
Yep. No, absolutely. We will work to hold such a briefing. I know that staff are working to educate all board offices on the provisional charter, and I think once that is finalized, we should shine a light on that and have an update at that point in time. Board Member Hood.
Yes, I too share the excitement about the new members-only credit union, and kudos to Alpha Kappa Alpha. I have more than enough of their sorority members in my family, so I will join them in celebrating this new credit union, and there will be lots of pink and green, and people know that that's the AKA color of choice. I'm excited about this particular credit union for a number of reasons. One, it continues our mission of providing access to affordable financial services. Also, the AKA sorority does wish to be an MDI, so I think we're going to have another minority depository really helping cure some of the intractable issues that have been facing a lot of communities of color. One of the things that I also want to say is that when I think about the goal of this particular sorority, and that is a main goal of the proposed credit union would be persons providing for human beings, which embodies the idea of caring for the human condition and making it better. And you all quite simply put, it follows the credit union model and mantra that we already know of people helping people. So the AKA members only credit union is going to be following in those ideals. And I just so support it. I look forward to seeing them soon when they get the charter. But I also want to thank the folks who worked diligently in CURE to bring this whole event to fruition. And that was Tricia Mickley from CURE. And let's see who else, the Consumer Access Coordinator, and then Sue Ryan, Consumer Access Division Director. So I know a lot of folks worked behind the scenes, but I certainly wanted to call out those two. And again, bring into fruition the members-only Federal Credit Union. Thank you all.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for everyone for joining us today. That is the end of our agenda. There being no further business, we are hereby adjourned.